Story 1. I always offered or insisted on splitting the bill. Once a man paid for dinner and told me to pay him back half because I did not have sex with him that night. I never made that mistake again. Story 2. As an alpha male, I get her to pay for both of us to assert dominance. Then my mom picks me up. Story 3. Don't bother me anymore. I always prefer to pay my own bills to avoid any you owe me crap. Story 4. If I ask a woman out, I will pay. If she wants to split the bill, that's no problem. Story 5. I'm for it, especially if you are the woman and you are not feeling the man. I am not trying to come across as a freeloader or take advantage of someone who is kind enough to offer out of politeness. Since it is so new, I think the bills should be split until you are official or more serious. But that is just me. Story 6. As a woman, I prefer to split the bill. You may treat me to a full meal or anything else when we are exclusive. Story 7. If it's a first date with someone you already know, old-fashioned rules apply. If it's a stranger from an application or a dating site, always choose a Dutch coffee date at midday in public, with your own transportation and an exit strategy. Story 8. I'd feel embarrassed if someone paid for me, as though they were paying me to be there. I'd also feel embarrassed paying for someone, as though I were paying them to be with me. Story 9. Historically, I always paid on the first date, which set a precedent. Trips and special dates became my responsibility. The one woman I split the bill with on the first date became my wife. She earned well and treated our money as shared. She even surprised me with trips and paid for them. What used to bother me when I paid was that the other person often did not offer to split the bill and did not say thank you for picking up the tab. Looking back, I dated many women who expected me to pay. Story 10. If I invite them, I will pay. If they invite me, I will suggest splitting the bill, but if they offer to pay, I will let them pay and say I will get the next one. Story 11. Generally, if I invite you to something, I'm paying. I'd split the bill if it's ambiguous. I'd let them pay if they offer. On a first date, though, you're probably going to have a better time if you do the expected thing and pay if you're the one who asked them out. Story 12. My feeling is that if your argument for why someone should do something ultimately comes down to because of their gender, then it is nonsense. If you say the person who asks should pay, I would agree. But since men are expected to approach women and initiate dates, that effectively means the man pays. The reason given for why men should approach and initiate is, again, because of their gender. In the end, there is no benefit to paying for dates. If there were, women would be arguing that they should get to do it. It gets interesting when a woman who previously dated men realizes she is bisexual and begins dating women, only to encounter the same entitlement. People believing their presence on a date should always be rewarded because they are the prize. Story 13. I make enough money to pay, even if it is not going anywhere. Story 14. As a guy, I like to pay the bill, especially if I am the one inviting. If my date wants to split or contribute, I suggest she invite me to something else, like dessert or a drink afterward. Story 15. As a guy, I go into the first couple of dates planning to pay for everything because that is how I was raised. I have never had a woman offer to split the bill before, but if she did, I would probably go along with it. Story 16. I usually don't care. If she offers to pay half, we split it. If not, I don't worry about it. Only once did it bother me. It was her idea to go to a slightly pricier place, and then she did nothing to carry the conversation or make the night enjoyable. She even pretended not to notice when the bill arrived. Story 17. As a man, I would expect to pay the whole bill but would not refuse a girl if she wanted to help pay. Story 18. I have always paid for the whole thing. A woman once insisted on splitting the bill with me. Story 19. People have mixed feelings about this, and you have to play it by ear depending on who you are with. However, the people who believe the man should completely pay for the first date are the loudest and most judgmental. Story 20. Absolutely not. As a man, I will cover the first date. If she insists, I will tell her to pay for the second date. Story 21. By default, I'll pay, but if she wants to split, I have no objection. Story 22. I don't mind. I think I prefer it, to be honest. That way the person will not feel entitled to ask for anything in return. I recommend this to everyone. Story 23. I will pay on the first date, but I do not make it expensive. I expect her to start paying for things by the second date and, at the latest, the third. If she has not paid for anything after the second date, it is a no-go. Story 24. If I ask her out, I pay by default. If she insists on splitting the bill, I will relent. Story 25. I offer to pay for the bill out of tradition, but if she then offers to split it, I will happily oblige. Story 26. No. I come from the late 1900s and that is not the way it is done. Story 27. The last first date I had was in the 1990s, and it was customary for the man to pay, so I am not much help. Story 28. If she will not, there will be no second date. I will share everything I have with a woman who shares with me. I will pay for meals and holidays and enjoy doing so. I do not pay for every random woman who agrees to meet. It takes a lot more than that. Story 29. If you invite someone out, be prepared to pay for both. If you are invited out, offer to pay your share or keep your choices modest. Do not order 2 drinks, an appetizer, the most expensive entree, and a dessert, then ask for another entree to go. Story 30. No big deal at all. In an ideal scenario, we would both agree on the game plan in advance. Story 31. As a man, I never ask to split the bill, but if my date offers, I do not argue and let her split it. It is pointless to argue over the bill, especially on a first date, so I go along with whatever she wants. My default is to assume I will pay the whole bill unless she says otherwise. If the date is going really well and she offers to split the bill or even pay for the whole thing, I say thank you and add that I will pay the next one to show I want to contribute and that I hope there will be another date. Story 32. If I do not want a second date, I accept their offer to pay half. Otherwise, I insist on paying in full and say they can pay next time, even though I know I will probably pay in full again because I am a people pleaser. Story 33. If I invite someone to dinner, I pay. If someone asks me to dinner, I offer to pay. Story 34. Guy here. I will always offer to pay the whole bill and will never argue if they want to split it. Simple policy. Story 35. I feel like it shouldn't be as big a deal as it is. Who cares? I pay, she pays, or we split. I've had women offer to split the bill, then tell me afterward they are mad I did not pay at all. After the date, they disappear into the ether. Story 36. I am a man and I would always offer and expect to pay. However, if my date suggested splitting the bill, I would agree. I paid about 65% of the time and we split the bill about 35% of the time. Story 37. I always pay unless she is rude or admits to the free meal thing. Story 38. If I asked you out, I am paying. If I find out you are shallow enough to reject someone over a free dinner, it is a lesson I paid $30 to $80 for, and I move on. I think many criticisms on both sides of the gender debate are valid, but I have never had any issues with paying for dinner. Real dating has always felt like a show of faith, and the potential rewards outweigh the cost to see if someone I think has potential is right for me. Story 39. I always pay. That's just the way my parents taught me. Sometimes I wish I would have split the bill, though. Story 40. I am a guy. I was always told that one of the important things to do on a first date is to pick up the tab. Story 41. I think the first date should be super casual. Order from a food truck and walk around, checking out little shops. It helps keep the nerves in check. If you are ordering from a food truck or counter anyway, pay for yourself. Story 42. I will pay if nothing is agreed. If she asks, I will let her know I received it, and if she asks again, I will comply. Story 43. Yes, I never expected my dates to pay for my share on the first date. You should never assume they will. Story 44. For me, it's simple. If I invite someone to lunch or dinner, I pay. If someone invites me to lunch or dinner, I expect them to pay, but to take my wallet. Circumstances are irrelevant. Story 45. I'm prepared to pay, but if the date insists, I'm not going to argue. Some women like to pay their way or not feel like they owe anything, which I can respect. Sometimes if a date wants to split the bill, I'll offer to pay for the meal and she can buy us drinks afterwards. That keeps the date going, lets her contribute, and results in more alcohol. Story 46. I was raised to believe that the person who invites pays the bill. If someone were to press, shockingly few people do, then, of course, split 50-50. You make one objection to be classy, but after that all is fair. Story 47. Split. It makes no sense anymore for men to pay by default. Women participate equally in the workforce nowadays, and many date multiple people at once during the get-to-know phase, so there is no exclusivity or expectation. It is different when you are actually dating and you know one partner may earn less. Story 48. It is a United States custom. In the rest of the world, there is a practice called separate checks. Story 49. Split it in a casual way, such as by having them leave the tip. I wish it were not so, but having one check rather than two feels more intimate. Story 50. I usually let the guy pay, but I will offer. It depends on his job and situation. However, I will strongly insist that he pay if I did not enjoy the date and do not plan to see him again. Story 51. I am a male. If I ask a girl out, I expect to pay for both of us unless she suggests splitting the bill, in which case you have ruined it and we will split. Manners cost nothing. Story 52. This is ideal unless one partner has a considerably lower income than the other. It asserts an intention of relationship equity. Story 53. If I were dating and we had a good date, I would pay, but only to see what kind of person you are. Would you appreciate the gesture and, at the next bar or on a second date, offer to pay or buy drinks in return? Or are you the type of person who takes without reciprocating? For me, this is not about sex. It is about how you treat other people and your character. We would be, after all, dating, and while your friends look at my social media, I would use this to judge your character. Story 54. I am an old school lady, and I like a masculine man who is a provider. Story 55. Growing up in my culture, I was taught a woman would only go Dutch or pay half if she did not want to see you again because she did not want a second date. You should have seen the look on my face when I found out women would go Dutch and still have sex with you afterward. Story 56. I always go into a first date expecting to split the bill because we do not know each other, and I like being prepared in case anything goes wrong. If he offers to pay, that is fine. If not, that is fine too. Story 57. As a man, that's fine. I take a 50-50 approach in the household. I have been on a few dates with women from different countries. I wait for the bill to see how they prefer to proceed. So far, the bill has always been split. Story 58. If she expects me to pay in full and does not offer, she does not get a second date. I wish I had learned that lesson much earlier. Story 59. I like the idea of splitting the bill because sometimes I feel embarrassed when someone pays for me, especially if I barely know them. Story 60. Speaking as a dude, I will happily pay. But if the girl doesn't offer, I wouldn't be interested in a second date. No one owes me if I do pay. It's just how I was raised, and it's a nice way to show interest in my opinion. Story 61. I think it's fair. You're both feeling each other out. I would expect and insist on 50-50 if I were in that position, but it is always nice to offer anyway. Story 62. If you want to be considered partner material, always offer to pay half. Nobody needs another anchor in their life. Story 63. Personally, splitting it is 100% the correct and fair thing to do. Forcing a man to pay is an ancient nonsense rule that should not exist anymore. Story 64. As a man, if a date goes well, I'd offer to pay and expect her to decline and suggest splitting it halfway. If she didn't and it became a pattern, I'd be worried, especially if she mentioned financial difficulties at any point during the date. I don't want a leech. 10 years later, my significant other and I just take turns paying. Story 65. On my husband's and my first date, we split the bill. The next day, on our second date, he paid because it was my birthday. On the third date, I paid. Story 66. I think it should be the standard. Expecting men to pay on the first date is incredibly outdated. Story 67. It's been a long time since our first date. I always make my wife pay when we go out because it makes me feel special. The joke is that it's a joint account. Story 68. I am female and expect to split bills and generally insist on it. I say I would like to split bills at the beginning of a date so I can relax. I have had too many strange experiences and assumptions over the years regarding paying. It seems bizarre for anyone to expect another person to pay for their meal or ticket unless it is explicitly agreed to. The worst, though, was a man I had said I wanted to split the bill with who disappeared to the bathroom with some sort of bowel ailment. He was gone so long that the bill arrived and sat there, and I ended up paying the whole thing. He did not offer to pay his half. Story 69. A first date should be something simple, like coffee, tea, or a smoothie. Keep the cost low. If it is not working, cut your losses early. One of these should be enough. Story 70. If I am invited on a date, I expect the other person to pay. If I invite someone on a date, I will pay. Story 71. I prefer it. It is the first date and it may not go anywhere. I do not want to leave someone I just met with the bill. If you try to leave me with the bill, I will pay my portion and walk. Because what the hell? Story 72. It cuts the tension in half, and if things don't go as expected, everyone goes home happy. Story 73. That seems like the most reasonable option, assuming both people have similar incomes and it is not a greater financial burden for one of them. Story 74. If we both have a couple of drinks and roughly equivalent meals, I'm fine not getting the calculator out. If they have more drinks or order a filet and lobster surf and turf, I'm less inclined to split the bill and would expect one of us to pay slightly more toward the tip. Story 75. On the first date, whoever invited pays. After that, split the bill until finances become a topic of discussion. Story 76. I always offer to split the check, especially on the first date. Story 77. As a fairly traditional man, I always go into a date expecting to pay. If the woman wanted to split, it would not bother me. That is just not my default plan. Story 78. I pick up the bill for everyone, not just women. My friends are not in the same financial situation as I am, so I try to spread that community love. Story 79. Not a problem. What's the issue here, social niceties or gender roles? Whoever invited the other out should pay. If the other person insists on splitting the bill, split it. Otherwise, the inviter pays. Story 80. I insist. For a first date or two, I think it is best if both people equally invest their time. We are just getting to know each other, and it is not fair to expect one person to pay for both while we are still deciding if we want to see each other again. Story 81. If we are not partners or married and go out to dinner, I expect to pay only my share of the meal. If the person I am with expects me to pay for their portion, they are not the person for me. Story 82. I'm all for it and will probably use cash so my wife doesn't find out. By splitting it, she'll think I ate by myself. Story 83. If I take a woman out on a date, I will definitely pay. I would not expect her to pay for a first date. If she asked me out, it might be different. Story 84. I pay because it feels like the chivalrous thing to do and I can easily afford it. But at some point, I need to see a gesture from her so I don't feel taken advantage of. If I don't see that gesture or it starts to feel like she expects it, then I'll end it. Story 85. If I ask someone out on a date, I will pay. If we mutually decide to go out to eat without any specific conversation about payment, I will assume we are splitting the bill. Story 86. I think I speak for all women when I say a manly man. Story 87. That does not happen. I am a member of Generation X and was raised to believe that a man has certain responsibilities and duties. With that in mind, I would not buy meals for her children or pay for rideshare trips for her. Those actions suggest a man knows he is dating outside his usual type and that the date is not meant for a real connection. He might as well hire a sex worker. At least everyone would be on the same page. Story 88. Some considerations. In modern times, with emancipation and similar changes, does it not make sense to split the bill? I do not see the argument about who initiated the meeting, because that is often one person. The point is both people want to meet. You are not paying the other to attend. If you pay for the first date, does that create an expectation that you will always pay? I want to be clear on expectations. I pay only for my own expenses because nobody has ever paid my bills. Women have jobs now, and most couples separate before or after having children, so long-term commitment is less certain. With friends, I always split the bill, so why would this be any different? If the other person does not agree, that is fine. There is simply no match. Story 89. Avoid first dates that require money. A first date is for getting to know someone and having a conversation. Story 90. I think it is weak. As a man, I want to set the tone and expectation that I will care for and provide for her, that I will sacrifice for time with her, and that I do not expect anything in return. I feel fortunate to be with her. I am not looking for ways to minimize my cost or effort. I want her to feel pursued and to be confident that I value being with her more than my money or convenience. Story 91. If that is what she wants, that is fine. I am a little old-fashioned that way, and I will happily pay for her. I am one of those people who like to open doors and offer seats. If she is not into that, I am flexible. Story 92. If someone asks to take you out, that usually means they will pay. It's the same as saying, my friends and I are taking another friend out for her birthday. Story 93. Whoever initiates the date pays until you are married, when it does not matter. Story 94. I bring my own money because I'm not going to let anyone tell me what I can or can't order. Story 95. It was a date a few years ago at a pretty nice restaurant. When it was time to pay, my date put 50 euros into my hand and walked away, not letting me insist on paying. That effectively split the bill, including the taxi home. She is now my wife. Splitting the bill always makes me uncomfortable. I want to pay, but others refuse. I think it would save a lot of hassle if everyone just split the bill and paid for what they had. Honestly, you would enjoy it more because you could order what you want without worrying about burdening anyone else. Those posts you see sometimes about people arguing, breaking up, or not going on a second date because one person did not pay the bill say a lot about that person. Story 96. If there is no agreement in advance of the date, expect to pay your own way. Plan and prepare to pay for everything except in egregious circumstances. For example, if a date orders the most expensive items or requests extra meals to take home. If they offer to pay, graciously accept and perhaps offer to cover the next time. If the date is going well and those circumstances do not apply, consider excusing yourself to the bathroom to pay the bill. If there is an agreement in advance, follow it even if those circumstances occur. An agreement in advance means any time before people have explicitly committed to the date, for example by booking travel, but not merely implicitly, for example by blocking off the day. If you have both arrived at the venue, that is the wrong time to ask about or sort out those details. I consider this gender-neutral advice. Story 97. I usually insist on paying either way. If a woman does not offer to split, I am probably not going on another date with her. Story 98. I'm fine with it, but if I'm asking her out for the first date, I'll cover it. It may be worth discussing in advance. Story 99. I would always like to pay the bill, but if someone took advantage or took my generosity for granted, it would be the last time I would want to see them. If you like them, it is nice to let them pay next time. Story 100. I used to pay about 70 to 80% on dates when I wanted to see someone again. I still do this in established relationships. Until the gender wage gap closes, I will not stop. If I do not want to see someone again, I prefer to split the bill. I paid for everything a few times in the past, but I would not recommend it. It sets a precedent and I was taken advantage of more than once. Paying for everything should be reserved for special occasions in an established relationship. Story 101. Granted, it has been 15 years since my last first date, but I have always paid, or at least tried to pay, for the first date. I know there is a fine line between paying because I am being gentlemanly and making a woman feel like she owes me something, so I do not insist if she wants to split the bill. I do not pay because of chivalry or because I think women should be reliant on me. I do it because it increases my attractiveness. At the end of the day, Most women find the ability to provide attractive, while most men prioritize physical appearance. A 7 out of 10 woman will remain 7 out of 10 whether she pays or not. A 5 out of 10 man may move up to 6 out of 10 if he has no problem paying for a meal. So why not potentially boost my attractiveness by 1? Even if the date does not go anywhere, she may tell friends about me, and it is good to leave a positive impression. Also, a woman probably spends an hour or so getting ready, choosing an outfit and applying makeup. I arrive in what I am already wearing. Since she is putting in more effort, I should at least pay. Story 102. As a man who has not been on a date for a long time because of marriage, I always pay on the first date. It is old-fashioned, but I offer to let her buy drinks or pay for a second date if she prefers. If not, we can go our separate ways. I am really looking forward to never having a first date again, though. Story 103. I don't like it. I'm a traditional, high-earning, high-value man. But if she must, we can split the bill. Story 104. When I was dating, as a man I expected to pay the bill. Maybe it was old-fashioned, but 90% of the time you could not go wrong with that approach. If she raised the issue and wanted to split, I agreed. Story 105. I always offer to pay on dates, whether it is the first or the 50th. Sometimes my date insists on splitting the bill, and that is fine because I do not want to make them feel uncomfortable. When I invite someone to dinner or an event, I expect to pay. I do not resent it. For me, it is not about the money but about stepping up, taking charge, and showing that I can lead and support. It is also simply a kind thing to do. Story 106. Whoever asks the person out pays the full bill. Simple as that. Story 107. This may not be popular on Reddit, but I only accepted second dates if the man paid. If he was uncomfortable, I would split the bill. I wanted a financially generous man, and making this a criterion ultimately paid off. Story 108. In my opinion, the man should offer to pay and the woman should offer to split the bill. The man can either accept her offer or offer to pay again, and the woman should graciously accept. Story 109. I always prefer to split on a first date. Puts us on equal footing. Story 110. Laughing out loud. If she is not willing to split the bill, I am not paying for both. Plus, she is a loser. No one is going to buy you free food in this economy. We do not even know each other. Story 111. I guess I'm a little old-fashioned, but I always paid for dinner. Story 112. Separate checks show intent. As a man, it reveals whether a woman is a gold digger when she says she forgot her purse. As a woman, it reveals whether a man is attempting to pay for sex. Story 113. I'm all for it. Nobody feels they owe the other person anything or that they invested too much. If it doesn't work out, you only lose the cost of a meal. It's no different than going out with friends. I prefer splitting the bill for the first couple of dates. Story 114. I think it is perfect. I am in a great relationship right now, and my boyfriend and I alternate paying for dinner or split the bill on date nights. When you first start dating, or even on an initial date before becoming exclusive, I have always preferred to pay for my own food and drinks. Story 115. Honestly, I feel fine about this. It curbs the tendency for some people to go on dates just to get a free meal. When both people split the bill, it lets the date focus on getting to know each other without implied repayment undertones. Story 116. Personally, I prefer to split the bill. I feel it is presumptuous to assume that either party will pay in full unless this was previously disclosed or agreed upon. Story 117. Equal rights. 50-50 or, depending on what you order, you pay for it. Story 118. A woman should offer and a man should decline. What happens after that will determine your compatibility. Story 119. I strongly prefer that each person pays for their own food, ticket, or whatever applies to the date. That way there is no pressure on anyone for a second date or for sex or intimacy. As a woman, I often feel pressured to do more than I am comfortable with when a man pays. Only after 3 or 4 dates that have all gone well do I feel comfortable having one person pay for both. Story 120. I prefer it. I cannot be pressured. I like to keep my agency. Story 121. The person who initiates the date should be willing to pay if the person who was asked chooses not to split the bill. Not splitting the bill is rude behavior, and as the person who was asked, you should at least offer. Story 122. I am fine with it. However, if it is with a stranger, a coffee date would be better. Story 123. My partner pays mostly, so it has not been an issue. I always offer to pay my share. Story 124. It depends on how the date was arranged. If I asked her out and specifically suggested dinner, I would expect to pay for the whole thing. If we both decided to go out to dinner, splitting it makes sense. Story 125. I always had the first date at a coffee shop and paid. I found it was a great way to have a caffeinated conversation, and if it seemed like it was not going anywhere, the maximum loss was $6. I did not mind. Story 126. I haven't needed to date in a while, but when I was online dating before I met my wife, first meetings were usually coffee at a cafe. I would line up to order, try to read the room, and offer to pay as appropriate. Not cheap, but not too upmarket either. Come to think of it, there were not many second dates. Story 127. I am older, but as a woman I always felt uncomfortable when someone else paid for me on a date. It made me feel like a child. Story 128. A first date is all about showing the other person that you are normal and not a weirdo, so I do not like deviating from social norms that early. It is best to play it safe. On the other hand, if someone told me they were striking out on first dates and were behaving that way, I would draw conclusions quickly about why the other person bailed. Story 129. I am always open to making new friends. Before I met my partner, I always told my dates that if someone asked me out and then expected me to pay my own way, I would never see them romantically again. If I asked someone out, I would never expect them to look at the prices on the menu, let alone consider the bill. Story 130. I am happy to pay for myself, but when I first met my husband, I appreciated that he paid. It felt gentlemanly of him to take care of me, and I liked it. Story 131. I was going to split the bill on my first date with my husband, but he insisted on paying because he had invited me to dinner. That solidified the feelings I had been developing for him over the 4 months we were co-workers. Story 132. A first date shouldn't be an expensive dinner. A simple coffee or a walk in the park would work. I would offer to pay because the bill would be minimal. Story 133. I don't really care. As a bloke, I usually offer to pay, but if the woman suggests splitting the bill, I do not object. If the date has gone really well, I will suggest she gets the next round of drinks. Story 134. It is mandatory for me. I do not want anyone thinking they deserve anything after dinner. Story 135. A requirement for a second date. I have been on one first date where I paid for the entire meal, but I was a young student and we shared a single pizza. Story 136. For what it's worth. I am a 45-year-old man. I always like to pay on a first date. I will happily split the bill if she insists. Story 137. I don't mind. I'll offer to split it. But I usually assume the guy is much more into me if he pays. He likes me enough that he wouldn't want anything to be a deal breaker. It makes me feel really good afterwards too. Wow, he really likes me. Story 138. I always paid for myself. I'm an adult and I want to order what I like. So why wouldn't I? As a woman, it avoids the you owe me dynamic, but more importantly, I need to take care of myself. I can budget and provide for myself, and that is expected these days. The days of getting married as the primary goal are over. Story 139. She will think you are cheap if you split the bill. Save it for the third or fourth date. Story 140. As a lesbian, I do not have to worry about that problem. People usually assume we will split the bill, and maybe one day when I have a better job I can pick up both tabs, but for now it is fine. A tangent about networking. One way to make friends and connections in your industry is to find someone at your level or one step above and offer to buy them a coffee in exchange for an informational interview. You get 30 minutes, more or less depending on how busy they are, to ask about their experience and tips for your future career. Aim for 85% of the time them speaking and 15% you asking questions. Today people will often choose a video call instead of an in-person meeting, but offering to buy their coffee shows you value their time and are willing to commit to a time and date. Sometimes they will even buy your coffee, which is very kind. Story 141. These answers are surprising. The last couple of times I offered to split the bill, the men seemed offended, so I stopped. Story 142. I expect to split the bill as a woman who mostly dates men. The only exceptions are when I really like someone. I'll let them pay if they offer, though I usually refuse, and I say I'll get the next one to hint that I want a second date. I also offer to pay if one of us put in much more effort to get to the date. For example, if the meeting place was next to my house and my date drove 30 minutes from another town, I think it's fair to pay the whole bill, especially if I suggested the location. Story 143. On a first date, both people are especially vulnerable to scams, so it is safer for both to pay. After that, it is acceptable for one person to pay the entire bill, but partners should alternate who pays. Story 144. As a man, by default, I assume I will pay the whole bill. If she wants to split it, I am fine with that, but she will need to say so. I do not really care either way, to be honest. Story 145. Sounds fair to me, but I would only do it if the girl insists. Otherwise, it is on me. Story 146. That seems perfectly fair. A first date is always to see how well we vibe and mesh, and splitting the bill seems polite. Story 147. I went on 2 dates while touring Australia and Japan. The women offered to pay for themselves. It was very refreshing. Story 148. Yes, I'm all for equality. If my queen wants to be a leader and pay for her own food, I'm all for it. In this economy, my wallet is thanking me, laughing out loud. Story 149. As a man, I like to pay for the first date. If she offers to split, I say you can get the next date or you can buy ice cream afterward. It's nice and shows that I plan for more dates, but I'm not going to a damn steakhouse for a first date. Story 150. I am a 33-year-old woman. I think the person who asks someone out should pay for the first date. However, if I am asked out, I always bring enough to cover my share. Story 151. I'm a firm believer that whoever is significantly richer should pay. Just kidding. I'm broke and don't go on dates, so I have no clue how that works. I don't mind paying unless the woman is bratty and needy, demanding expensive and pretentious things. I do not like people who insist on extravagant first date expenses. I'll buy the cheapest lager and a frozen pizza. Do you want to hang out or not? Story 152. I always offer to pay. At least half the time, the woman offers to split. Story 153. To quote 50, whoever had the idea to go on the date should pay. Story 154. As a man, if it was an enjoyable conversation or date, I pay. If it was not enjoyable, we split. Story 155. This is a comment I made elsewhere. I have only ever been on one first date that was not paid for by both people, either by splitting the tab at the end or by taking turns buying rounds. In none of these instances was there any suggestion that it would be handled differently. The one exception was just before payday, and I offered to pay when scheduling the date. I am not such a catch that anyone who would otherwise expect to have their evening paid for by me would be willing to foot the bill or even split it. I realize there is a perception that men pay for the majority of first dates, and I understand why that was true in the past, but I am curious to see any evidence that this is still the case. Story 156. I am a 34-year-old woman. Men usually pick up the tab, and I am grateful. I keep my card with me just in case. Story 157. It really depends on the type of date. That might be a cop-out. If it is an expensive first date, splitting the bill is often a better idea. I am 64 years old, and in earlier years I was more comfortable with the person who asked paying because there were fewer one-and-done dates. These days, with dating sites and many options, more dates end up as one and done, but that may be just my perception. Story 158. I am a woman and have always offered to split the bill. If a man wants to pay or pushes back, I will not argue. Story 159. The person who asked for the date should plan on paying. The person invited should bring money and offer to pay their share. Story 160. If the date is going well and I want to see them again and I can tell they do too, when the check comes I say I will pay for this one if they will pay for the next. It is respectful and lets them know I want to see them again. It usually goes over well. If the date is not going well, I ask if they are okay with splitting the bill. It does not matter if they are offended because I will not see them again. If they order many expensive drinks and clearly expect you to pay, that is a red flag. Split the bill and do not speak to them again. Make sure the first date is at a place that is affordable. That way it does not matter much how much of the bill you have to pay. Fast food will not work unless they appreciate the humor in going to a place like Taco Bell on a first date, and no one deserves a dinner at a very fancy restaurant until you have met them at least once. So the first date should not be at a super fancy place. If you can swing it, hibachi usually works well. You will have time to chat and get to know them. It is entertaining, there is people watching, the food is great, you sit next to your date instead of staring directly at them so it feels less like a job interview, and while it is not cheap there are much more expensive places. Another idea is to ask if they know any good hole-in-the-wall places. Those are usually affordable, and they also indicate your date will be happy to go there. Story 161. I'm covering the first date. That's how I was brought up. If she insisted on splitting the bill 50-50, I wouldn't argue because I don't want to offend anyone. I don't mind paying the bill every time if the person I'm spending my time with is genuine. Story 162. I am an old-school member of Generation X and have been out of the dating game for decades, but my first dates were usually a walk and a coffee. I would buy the coffee because it was just a latte, no big deal. I get the idea that some of you are spending a lot of money on a first date. For me, it was always something relatively free where we could talk. Story 163. Honestly, because of the society I grew up in and how I was raised, as a man I would offer to pay for both of us. However, on the first date, if she insists on paying, I would let her pay once. Story 164. It is fine. If you are determined to stand by your principles on this, you limit your dating pool to people who take things too seriously. Story 165. Fine by me. In most cases, I do not mind paying the full bill myself, as long as I do not get the sense that she is just playing me for a free meal. I generally do not do dinner as a first date, so the amount I pay for a cup of coffee or a few drinks is not excessive. Story 166. It depends. I'll offer to pay for my own, but if they want to pay, I would not argue. I would simply say thank you, that is kind of you. For splitting the bill, it depends on the situation. If we ordered similar items, I am fine with splitting, but if one person had a steak and a bottle of wine while the other had a small plate and a glass of water, splitting would be unfair. Story 167. I am 35 and from the South. It is expected that men pay for dates, especially the first one. Splitting the bill does not bother me, but I would prefer to pay every other bill after the first. Story 168. I ask directly how they want to handle the bill. I do not mind paying if that was their plan, and it lets them feel comfortable splitting the bill if they prefer. If I ask them out, I do not let them pay for my meal. Story 169. I'm perfectly fine with it. I think the stigma of men having to pay for everything is overrated. It's definitely appreciated when he does. Then on the second date, if there is one, I'll offer to pay. Story 170. My wife does not allow me to date anymore, but I firmly believe the person who invited the other out should pay. On a first get-to-know-you date, such as coffee, beer, or lunch, people should buy their own. If I am trying to impress or because I am old school, I will pay. Regardless, it should be discussed before the date so expectations are set and not left until the check arrives. Story 171. I am married now, but when I was dating, I always offered to pay for myself on dates and brought my purse. The men I dated still offered to pay. My husband paid for the first 3 dates because he wanted to, not because I felt entitled to it. I judge people by their character, not by their wallet. It would not have changed how I felt about him or about my exes if they had not had enough money to pay for me. The more important issue for me was weeding out men who expected sex just because they bought me alcohol, or men who wanted the first date at their place. Dates have always been in public, and if someone tries to load me with alcohol, I delete their number as soon as I get home. Story 172. I like it when the man pays for the first date, although it did not stop me from going on a second date when he did not pay. Unless I am 100% sure there will not be a second date because I do not want one, I insist on paying for my own meal. Otherwise, I would feel like I am taking advantage. Story 173. I try to pay for everything. If she is hesitant, I ask if she can pay for our next coffee. Story 174. I usually offer to pay since I ask them out, but I don't mind splitting the bill if they prefer. Story 175. I like to lead when it comes to dating. I can dictate and control the situation, including location, time, and so on. I find that she will be more agreeable and will usually prefer a man who makes decisions and takes control. Essentially, you set the tone. My finances are in a good state, so it is not breaking the bank to pay for food and drinks. But it is 2024. If you want to split the bill, then split it. Just know that even if she suggests splitting, or says it is okay, she is likely not being truthful, laughing out loud. Make her feel feminine and treat her like a lady, and you will likely have a higher success rate. Lastly, and most importantly, take your date somewhere where you can afford to pay for two people. Story 176. I do not go on dates often. I offer to split the bill, but if the man insists on paying, I let him. If he later asks for the money back, I will repay my share. We do not eat anything expensive. Meals usually cost $20 to $30. I do not want to waste time arguing about who pays. Story 177. I do coffee or dessert for first dates. First dates, especially those arranged through dating apps when you have not met before, are essentially an opportunity to meet. They allow you to see whether you are attracted to each other and whether you are the person you appear to be. First dates should not be big, elaborate events. They are not an excuse to dress up because one or both people want to pretend to be someone else. In my humble opinion, if a woman expects a man to spend a lot of money and effort on a first date, or outright requires it, she is not relationship material. Story 178. I always insist on paying for the first date unless she wants to split. I'm Dutch enough to say yes please. Story 179. I'm open to it. The context and rationale do matter. If I invited her on the date, I likely expected to pay. In that scenario, I probably chose both the restaurant or activity and the company. The giving and receiving of gifts is an important part of social interaction. I will add that any man who does not offer to pick up the tab as a freely given gift, but instead intends it as a form of leverage, deserves nothing but contempt from his dates and peers alike. Who pays for the second date? Well, that is a wide open field. If she enjoyed the first date and wishes to see me again, a reciprocal offer is a great way to indicate that interest. Story 180. As a man, I am totally fine with it. From my experience, before my current girlfriend, women were usually the first to take out their cards or cash, which was fine, but I would offer anyway. Story 181. If the date goes well, I would not let her pay. It is an incredibly easy missed opportunity to do something nice for someone you like. Unless she is a doctor who presumably earns 3 to 4 times as much as I do, as my last date did, it seems silly to insist. Of course, it is probably not a coincidence that my stance on this changed completely from when I was a student, when an extra $30 to $40 was a big deal. Story 182. I do not mind picking up the bill as a man, partly because I can afford it and because the kind of place I would choose for a first date would not break the bank. If she is demanding or expects a very expensive restaurant for a first date, we are probably not compatible. Story 183. I am a firm believer that the person who asks someone out should pay for the first date. After that, either pay for your own meal or take turns paying. Story 184. I always plan to pay, not because I'm a man, but because once I was invited to dinner at a place beyond my price range and felt uncomfortable the whole time. Now I offer to pay. If they prefer to split, that's fine. Story 185. As a man, I always pay. As a father, I would encourage my daughter to pay if there is any hint that things are not going well. That way, there is no confusion about how things are going. Story 186. It's an, I may only want to have sex with you for the rest of my life sort of situation. So yeah, I guess. Story 187. Great. Then he won't feel like he paid for something before I've had time to assess his intentions. If it's online dating, the first date should be a platonic coffee. I'd let him pay the $2. Story 188. Under no circumstances will I let you pay even a penny if I am the one who asked for the date. That applies to the first or the 327th date. I do not care if you make 10 times what I make. There are no further expectations. Story 189. It's a trap. A woman told me she went off on a man for agreeing with her when she offered to split the bill. I laughed out loud. He was confused when he did not get a second date. Story 190. Regardless of whether I like the person or whether the date went well, I would always pay my own bill. I do not want to feel responsible, and if two people agreed to go on a first date, one person should not be expected to pay for the other, especially if the date goes badly. Story 191. Oh bro, I ask for separate checks on a first date. I have met too many men who act like they are being generous by paying for me and then hold it over my head later. Story 192. Unless they speak up first, I will always pay for the first date. If they say afterward that they want to go Dutch or even pay for the whole thing, that is fine. Story 193. I always insisted on splitting the bill. If a guy was weird about it, that was a good sign he might have other expectations about gender roles. Story 194. For first dates, I'll do something affordable like boba or coffee. If I asked her out, I'll pay for the first date as a thank you gesture. Most dates I've been on offered to split, and I was flattered. They always smiled when I said I would pay since I asked them out. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.